Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. Today we're tackling something pretty big agroecology, but we're not just going to define it and leave it at that. We're going to compare it to, well, a bunch of other sustainable farming approaches that you've probably at least heard of.
Yeah, it's kind of like we're making this Venn diagram, of eco-friendly farming, finding out where their goals overlap and where they each branch off and do their own thing. It gets really interesting.
It does. So get ready for some light bulb moments. We'll unpack what makes each of these approaches unique, and we'll see how they all play into, the future of food.
Exactly, because it's not just about buzzwords, right? It's about understanding the nuances and then thinking about what it all means for how we eat, how we grow food, all of it.
Okay, let's get down to business. First up, we got to compare agroecology with, the one everyone seems to get a little confused by, organic farming.
Yeah, that's a good place to start, because you see organic labels everywhere.
Okay.
But are they really the same thing as agroecology? Not really, no.
Okay, so spill the tea.
All right, well, they're both trying to do good things, reduce that environmental impact, make sure we have that biodiversity you always hear about, and obviously produce healthy food. We want to eat healthy, right?
Of course.
But the difference is with organic, you're really focused on what, the ingredients you'd use in a recipe. It's about natural fertilizers. No synthetic pesticides. It's all about the inputs.
So organic is like reading that nutrition label, making sure nothing funky is going into the food.
Oh, I got it. Agroecology, though, that takes a much wider view, looks at the entire farm as its own little ecosystem. It even considers all the social and economic stuff, too. Are the people working on this farm getting paid fairly? Is the farm helping out the local community? Things like that.
Whoa, okay, so it's way more than just ingredients. It's about the whole story of the farm.
Yeah, think of it this way. Organic is like checking a box. You meet certain standards. Boom, you're certified. Agroecology, though, that wants to know the farm's whole life story.
I like that. So it's like the environmental chapter, the social chapter, the economic chapter, all of it. That's a really helpful way to look at it.
Glad it helps. Now, let's flip things around. Look at it from the shopper's perspective.
Okay.
Because, at the grocery store, you see those labels, those prices. So how do these approaches actually show up in the marketplace?
Ooh, yeah, that's a good question. Especially because I know for a fact organic stuff usually costs more.
You're totally right. It's because organic has that name recognition, People trust that label, and they're willing to shell out a few extra bucks for it.
Yeah, I'm definitely guilty of that. Does agroecology even, have a presence in the market? Do I even know if I'm supporting it?
It's getting there.
Yeah.
It's not as focused on being this big marketable thing. It's less about slapping a label on something and more about aligning your values with the farms you choose.
That makes sense.
Think about it. Would you rather buy from a farm that might not have that big fancy organic certification, but, they treat their workers well and they're doing everything they can to protect the environment?
That's a tough one. I mean, I think I would,
Yeah.
but it's definitely something I've got to think more about.
For sure. And it's not about saying one is better than the other. They both have good points, but it's important to recognize that they're different.
Makes total sense.
Okay,
on to the next one. Let's talk about regenerative agriculture. That's another one that everyone's buzzing about these days.
Sure.
How does it compare to agroecology? Because they seem to have a lot in common.
Oh, they totally do. Both of them are all about soil health. It's the foundation. And they both say you got to work with nature, not against it.
Okay, so we're talking cover crops, no-till farming, all that good stuff.
Exactly. Those are the kinds of things you'll see in both.
So where do they split off then? Where does regenerative agriculture have its own thing going on?
Well, regenerative ag, it really focuses on this thing called carbon sequestration, basically pulling carbon out of the air and storing it in the ground so it can't contribute to climate change.
Yeah, carbon sequestration. That's definitely a high topic. And it seems like a really important one, too.
Oh, for sure. No, agroecology, it definitely cares about carbon sequestration, too. But it's got that bigger picture in mind still, thinking about the social and economic side of things as well.
So, with that no-till farming you mentioned, a regenerative farm would be all about maximizing that carbon storage.
Yeah.
But agroecology would want to know, hold on, are the farm workers benefiting from this too? Is the whole community being lifted up?
Exactly. It's not that they disagree. It's just that they look at things from different angles.
I get it. It's about the lens you're looking through.
Exactly. And even though they have different focuses, a lot of their actual practices are the same, those cover crops and composting we talked about.
Yeah, those are pretty essential no matter what.
Totally.
Okay.
Ready for another one?
Hit me with it.
Let's talk permaculture. This one's a little different. It's almost more like a philosophy than a specific farming method.
Yeah, you're right. It feels different. I know it's about sustainability and designing systems,
Yeah.
but how does it fit in with all this agroecology stuff?
Well, permaculture is all about designing sustainable systems. But for living in general, not just farming, the cool thing is its principles work perfectly with agroecology's goals.
Okay, so permaculture is like the blueprint for living sustainably, and then agroecology takes those ideas and uses them for farming.
You got it. But permaculture is not just some theory you read in a book. It leads to real practices on the farm. Things like closing the loop, nothing goes to waste.
Oh, okay.
And mimicking how nature does things, thinking long term, all that stuff lines up perfectly with agroecology.
This is really cool, seeing how all these approaches can work together. It's like they all have their strengths.
Exactly. It's not about getting one winner. It's about using all the tools in the toolbox,
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, last comparison, promise.
Okay, deal. Let's look at agroecology in the context of integrated farming systems.
I've heard that term, but if you asked me to explain it, I'd probably just stare at you blankly.
No worries. It's basically all about combining different activities on the same farm. So you've got your crops, your livestock, forestry, all working together.
Like a variety show, but for farms.
Kind of. Think of it more like a really well-designed house where every room has a purpose.
Okay, I like that. So the crops are like the kitchen providing food.
Yeah. Livestock, maybe that's the living room. It gives you warmth and other resources.
And then the garden's like the forestry. Provides shade, makes everything look nice.
Exactly. Everything has its place.
All right, that's much better image than a variety show.
So where does agroecology fit into this well-designed house?
It brings the science, the ecological know-how to make sure this whole integration thing is actually sustainable.
Okay. So it's not just about randomly throwing things together.
Nope. It's about understanding how everything interacts, making sure it's healthy for the whole system.
Gotcha. Give me an example.
Okay, so integrated farming systems might say, hey, let's raise some chickens near this orchard. Use their manure as fertilizer.
Okay.
But agroecology comes in and says, hold on, let's make sure that chicken manure is actually good for those trees.
Yeah.
And that it's not going to run off and pollute the nearby river. So it's like a checks and balances kind of thing.
You got it. It's about making sure everyone benefits, not just one part of the system at the expense of another.
That's super important.
Oh, yeah. And there are tons of examples of this in the real world. Things like agroforestry. That's where you've got trees and crops growing together, or rice fish systems. And then there's crop livestock integration.
So many different ways to mix and match.
Right. And they all benefit from thinking about things from an agroecological perspective.
This is making me realize how complex farms really are.
They are.
Like they're these intricate webs. And we're only just starting to understand them.
That's a great way to put it. And that's why agroecology is so important. It helps us see those connections, understand the whole picture, so we can make good choices. Choices that are good for people and the planet.
I like the sound of that.
Yeah.
But before we get too comfy with all these definitions, there's another layer we got to talk about. One that goes beyond the farm itself.
Oh. I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
I will. But first,
Hey.
we got to take a quick break. We'll be right back after this.
It's about us, the shoppers.
Yeah.
How we fit into all of this.
Yeah, that's a good point. Because I feel like I get caught up in looking for those labels.
Yeah.
Assuming that if something says organic, it's automatically good.
Yeah, I get that. But with agroecology, it's about going deeper than the label.
So how can we, as consumers, get better at making choices that actually support all this good stuff?
Well, it starts with understanding what agroecology is really about. It's not just a list of things farmers do. It's a whole way of thinking about how we produce food.
Okay, so Agroecology 101. Give me the basics.
All right, so imagine this. A delicious cake.
Cake.
With 3 layers. The bottom layer. That's the science, applying those ecological principles to farming, understanding things like nutrient cycles, how pests and those good bugs interact, the whole web of life out there on the farm.
It's like biology class, but for your garden.
Pretty much. Then, on top of that science-y layer, you've got the actual farming practices, all those techniques we talked about, cover crops, crop rotation, integrating livestock. But it's not just about doing them. It's about doing them in a way that keeps that balance.
Right. It's like knowing why you're doing something, not just doing it because someone said it's good.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, the third layer, this is the most important one. This is where the social and economic stuff comes in.
Okay. So we're talking fair treatment of workers, supporting local economies, that kind of stuff.
You got it. Agroecology recognizes that it's not just about the environment, it's about people too.
Because we're all connected.
Exactly. It's about asking, is the system fair to the people working the land? Does it help the community? Do people have a say in how their food is produced?
Yeah.
Big questions.
Yeah, definitely makes you think.
And that's why these deep dives are so important. They give you the knowledge to make those informed choices. Because every time you buy something, you're kind of voting for the kind of food system you want to see.
So it's not just about me trying to buy organic. It's about thinking about where my food comes from.
Yeah.
And how it got to me.
Exactly. All right, so we've got the principles down, but I'm sure some farmers are listening thinking, okay, this sounds great, but how do I actually do this? Where do I even start?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's one thing to talk about it, but it's another to actually make it happen.
For sure. And there's no magic formula. Every farm's different. But there are some general steps you can take.
Okay, give me the roadmap.
All right, step one, you got to assess what you're already doing. Take a good hard look at your farm. Test your soil. See how much water you're using. Look at the biodiversity you've got going on.
So it's like giving your farm a checkup before you start prescribing any medications.
Exactly. This gives you a baseline, so you know where you're starting from, and then you can set some realistic goals.
Gotcha. Assessment check. Goals. Check what's next.
Now you start making changes. But here's the key. Don't try to do everything at once.
Okay, so slow and steady wins the race.
Exactly. Think of it like climbing a staircase, one step at a time.
Baby steps. I can do that. So what kinds of changes are we talking about here?
It could be something as simple as adding cover crops to your rotation. Or maybe you try no-till farming on a small piece of land. Maybe you cut back on synthetic fertilizers. Just a little bit.
Start small. See what happens.
Exactly. The important thing is to observe. See what works, what doesn't work, and adjust as you go.
I'm sensing a theme here. Observation seems pretty important in agroecology.
You're totally right. Remember that permaculture principle? Observe and interact. Well, agroecology is all about that.
It's about paying attention, learning from what you see, and adapting.
You got it. Now I know what you're thinking. This all sounds great for these small, crunchy granola farms, but can it actually work on a bigger scale?
Yeah, that's what I was just thinking. Can this really feed the world?
That's the million-dollar question. And it's not easy, but there are more and more examples showing that, yes, it can work on bigger farms too.
Okay, give me some hope here.
Yeah.
What does that look like?
Well, one really promising area is integrating agroecology with integrated farming systems. Remember that well-designed house we talked about?
Yeah.
Well, IFS is all about combining different things on the same farm. So you might have a larger farm that's raising livestock and using their grazing to help improve the soil for their crops.
Okay, so it's about taking those agroecological principles and weaving them into these bigger, more complex farms.
Exactly. And it can actually make those farms more profitable too.
Ooh, now we're talking. Tell me more about these benefits.
All right. So for one, these integrated systems are more resilient. They're not as vulnerable to pests and diseases because they're not just growing one thing.
It's like that saying, don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Yeah. And by having livestock, you're adding another source of income. Plus, if you manage the grazing well, it can actually make your soil healthier, which is good for your crops.
That's awesome. It's like everyone wins.
Right. So yeah, I think agroecology has huge potential to change how we grow food, even on a large scale.
This is really encouraging. It feels like we could actually create a food system that's good for everyone and for the planet.
I think so too. It's definitely a journey. And there are challenges. But that's what's so cool about agroecology. It's always evolving, always adapting. It's not about following a strict set of rules. It's about constantly learning and improving.
I love that. It's hopeful, but I feel like there's still one piece missing.
Yeah.
We've talked about what agroecology is and how to do it, but what about the who? The people involved.
You're right. We can't forget about the human element. And that brings us to the role of communities and policy in all of this.
All right, let's talk about those people. Where do communities and policies fit into this whole agroecology thing?
Well, here's the thing. People forget that agroecology isn't just about what you do on the farm. It's a social movement. It's about communities taking charge of their food systems, making sure policies support small farms. It's about building a better food future for everyone.
Okay, so it's bigger than just individual farmers changing how they do things. It's a whole societal shift.
Exactly. It's about changing how we think about food, realizing it's not just something you buy at the store, it's a basic human right. And the way we produce it, it impacts everything.
The environment, society.
All of it.
You got it. So how do we actually make this happen? How can communities get involved in this movement?
Yeah, what can we do?
Well, there are some really inspiring things happening all over the world. One big one is building those local food networks, connecting farmers directly with the people eating their food.
So you're talking farmers markets, CSA programs, stuff like that?
Exactly.
Oh,
no, it reminds me of when I was a kid. I used to go to the farmers market with my grandma. It was really special.
Ah, that's nice. There's something about knowing the person who grew your food, you know?
Absolutely. That connection builds trust. It's about knowing where your food comes from, supporting your local farmers, and it helps build stronger communities.
And this ties into the policy side of things too, right?
For sure. We need policies that support these local food systems and the farmers who are part of them.
Because right now, it feels like the system favors those big industrial farms. Yeah, we need policies that focus on small farms, encourage those sustainable practices, and protect the environment.
And that's where advocacy comes in, right? People speaking up,
Yeah.
demanding change.
You got it. Okay, so we've got people changing things on their farms, communities building those local networks, people pushing for better policies. What else can we do as individuals, like in our everyday lives?
Yeah, because it feels kind of overwhelming.
Yeah.
Like, what can I actually do to make a difference?
You know, it sounds simple, but our choices as consumers, they matter a lot. Every time we buy food, we're sending a message about the kind of food system we want.
So it's not just about buying the organic option. It's thinking about the values behind that food.
Exactly. Ask questions. Where was this grown? How was it produced? Support those farmers who are doing things the right way, treating their workers fairly, taking care of the environment.
This deep dive has been really eye-opening. I feel like I've gone from thinking of agroecology as just another way to farm to seeing it as this potential solution to so many problems.
It's exciting, isn't it? It's about more than just food. It's about social justice, fighting climate change, building strong communities. It's a whole new way of looking at the world.
It is. I'm honestly feeling pretty inspired right now. I want to learn more, do more.
That's what we like to hear. It's about empowering people, giving them the knowledge to make a difference, because ultimately, change starts with each one of us.
So as we wrap things up here, what's the one thing you want our listeners to take away from all of this? What's the seed you want to plant in their minds?
The next time you sit down to eat, think about the journey your food took to get to your plate. Who grew this? How was it produced? What impact did it have on the world? Because every bite, it's a chance to connect with that story and to shape the kind of future we want to create.
That's beautiful. That's so true. Well, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive. Thank you all for listening, and a big thank you to our expert for sharing your knowledge with us.
It was my pleasure.
And remember, everyone, keep asking questions, keep learning, and keep choosing a better food future. We'll see you next time.